Irish horror has been building its own identity for years, and it's truly a shame how everyone sleeps on it. Forget the typical horror storylines. Irish horror brings a full package of ancient folklore, institutional trauma, biological dread, and forgotten myths to you. Even if you're not a horror fan, these are movies that you just can't ignore. So today, I've brought 12 specially curated Irish horror films for you to enjoy. Follow along with me to unfold what they are about, so you can choose your next pick. We are starting with the masterpiece. 1. Oddity 2024. In my opinion, this is Damien McCarthy's best work yet. It's a story about two sisters who take a grim, dark and vengeful turn. So, a woman, Danny, was a one-eyed stranger. Olin knocked on her door to warn her that there was someone inside her house who wanted to kill her. He begged her to let him help Danny Roost because she was terrified. But the very same night, she gets killed. Her psychiatrist husband pointed to Olin, who was actually his former patient, as that naturally everyone believed, especially after no background. But a year later, Danny's twin, blind sister Darcy, who is a curio shop owner and calls herself a supernatural medium, found out how Ted orchestrated her sister's murder and was actually the traitor. So she showed up at the country house where Ted and his new girlfriend Jana. Darcy brings them a gift, which is a large wooden mannequin from her collection. She places it where everyone can see it, and that is the most tormenting part. The mannequin was a cursed object that was used as a vessel for vengeance by Darcy. She used it to torment Ted, which ultimately led him to his death. That mannequin became one of the most memorable pieces of Irish horror history. The film won the Audience Award at SXSW's Midnighters section and again at the Overlook Film Festival. Also, Carolyn Brack did an amazing job playing the wife and the vengeful sister. For me, this film stands out because it will make easy even in the quietest scenes. Like, there's something bad. So if you are a fan of that thrill and build up tension, this movie is right up your alley. 2. Grabbers 2012. Grabbers is one of the most well-crafted horror premises of the 21st century, and you have to try it. So it all begins when some large, tentacled creature washes up on a remote Irish island after falling from the sky. These are actually sea-dwelling aliens who are a sucker for human blood, but let's say they have taste, because they hate human blood with high alcohol content in it. So after decoding the alien's weakness, the entire island gets drunk and stays that way. Director John Wright and his team spent so long working on the full ecology of the creature before a single design was drawn, like its home planet, its food chain and how it reproduced. In the film, you will see a sun-drenched island in summer, but actually, it was shot during a freezing January-winter in Donegal. One of the crew members even got frostbite on both his toes during a blizzard. But coming to the best part, you will get a little bit of everything. There's horror, comedy, and even romance. Romance because the film will revolve around two police officers who are literally each other's worst case scenario. One is a local alcoholic called Garda Kieran O'Shea, who must stay sober to fight the creature, while the other is his new by-the-book partner sent from Dublin, who has never tasted a drop of alcohol but must drink to survive. Their dynamic makes the film even better. It will be a perfect light horror film for you to enjoy. 3. Isolation 2005. Now this is not your usual horror film with a ghost or a monster. It's more like a biological horror that is genuinely disturbing. Here, our main protagonist, Dan, played by John Lynch, is a struggling farmer who sells his farm to a biotech company to run unauthorized genetic experiments on his cattle in exchange for some money he desperately needs. But then, the horror starts. One of his cows gives birth to something with teeth, and during the autopsy, the veterinarian finds out the mutated calf was pregnant too with a parasitic creature inside. As a result, the entire farm was placed under quarantine. It also bites humans, infects them, causes painful death while it grows inside them. Trying to fight this parasite, many people lost their lives, including Dan. In the end, he sacrificed himself to save his neighbor, Mary. The end is what gets me. After 4 months since the parasite infiltrated, the village was starting to get back to its normal state. When pregnant Mary went for an ultrasound check, the doctor told her everything was fine, but she knew it wasn't, because in the ultrasound monitor, the mutant creature was clearly visible. The ending hits hard because Mary is no longer on the farm. She is in Birmingham trying to restart her life, but the ultrasound reveals the horror may still be inside her, turning the final moment into a sick, biological time bomb. It even won 3 awards at Fantastic Fest, including Best Picture, Best Director, which was received by Billy O'Brien and a second place audience award. This film reminds me of the pandemic so much, but it's just more graphic and sickening. I think the plot has already convinced you to watch this film, so put it in your watch list right now. 4. The Hallow, 2050. For this film, the director Corin Hardy took a different approach as he felt cinema was already exhausted with the same vampire and werewolf tropes. So, he dug through Irish folklore and its supernatural heritage to come up with this plot. So, it begins with a British conservationist who moved to Ireland with his wife and son near the forests to run a survey for logging. The locals acted strangely as if they were trying to hide some. Actually, it was believed that some old, dangerous and demonic fairies called Hallows lived in those forests that took away children when disturbed. So, when Adam and his family disrupted their forest territory, a black fungus started spreading, and the Hallow took away his son and replaced him with a creature from Irish folklore. In the final scene, Adam manages to save his son but succumbs to death from his wounds, and the logging company continues to cut down the forest, foreshadowing the menace that will take over the village. The creatures in this film were designed by British SFX artist John Nolan, and Hart was adamant about keeping the effects practical because he believed a full CGI monster wouldn't evoke real fear. He took inspiration from Ridley Scott's Alien. The film was actually shot in the dense Irish forests for 6 weeks, which is why you can feel the genuine damp, cold darkness of it through your screen. Overall, if you're into eerie folk horror tales and mythology, I think this has strong potential to be up to your liking. 5. The Hole in the Ground, 2019. This film is also rooted in Irish folklore, where the Fae replaced children, imposters, and portals to the other world. Now, director Lee Cronin made sure his debut film wasn't just a product of the folklore, but had its own tragic elements. He chose a really strong and complex mother figure, Sarah, who faced immense abuse from her husband, so she escaped with her son and settled near an Irish forest. In the forest, there was a massive sinkhole, and one day, her son went near it, but when he came back, although he looked physically fine, Sarah noticed how he could remember the game they played, ate the food he disliked, and basically acted entirely different from her son. Here, Cronin proves he is a mastermind because he uses Sarah's experience of domestic abuse as a weapon against her perception of reality. When she doubts her son's identity, you cannot be certain whether she is seeing clearly or being delusional. That's how the film grounds the supernatural aspect in something emotional and realistic. Anyway, Sarah actually travels down the sinkhole, finds her real son among all the formless creatures, and returns only to burn down their home and destroy the fake son. But the film ends on an ambiguous note, hinting that her paranoia never really came to an end. However, I loved Sienna Kerslake's portrayal of Sarah. It's so on point, will get emotional as well. This is a film that explores what abuse does to a person and how you can doubt your perception even when you are certain. That's a different kind of psychological horror. So if you love a film with a strong female character, along with an emotional punch in the story and with an ending that will leave you thinking about it, then it's that type of film. 6. Fréwaka, 2024. This film explores some really heavy themes like intergenerational trauma and the violence done to Irish women across decades of institutional brutality. So here, Siobhan, aka Shu, loses her mother to suicide. Then she gets assigned to look after an elderly, agoraphobic woman called Paige in a remote village. Paige believed she was abducted decades ago by Eos She, Ireland's malevolent fairy tradition, and she performs these strange ritualistic practices at home. There are several folk horror elements in this film, like the hooded figures and the goat, which is the ultimate focal point to create the supernatural unease. Also, in Fréwaka, the Catholic Church is not used as a villain, but more like a wound to express how the institution formed Irish women's relationship with their own bodies and experiences that left a gap so big that darker forces occupied it. If you are going to watch the film, remember not to expect creature horror. Director Aislinn Clark basically portrays two women here. One is young and secular, while the other is old and deeply religious, but their trauma has a very similar root cause that they aren't aware of. Fréwaka even translates to roots in Irish, which, in the film, signifies how hard it is to free themselves from their destiny. It is billed as the first true Irish language horror feature with English subtitles. It even received a 96% score on Rotten Tomatoes. It was deliberately done by writer and director Clark to highlight the older belief system that persisted among the locals because they were never fully displaced. There are certain things that you should never miss out on, and this film counts as one of them, so just go for it. 7. The Canal, 2014. Our main protagonist, David, is a film archivist whose marriage is on the verge of collapsing as his wife is having an affair. On top of that, he finds out that his own house was the site where a brutal family murder took place in 1902. Right after that, a series of events filled with grief, paranoia, and possession takes place. When his wife's dead body turned up in a canal, he was naturally the prime suspect. As if this wasn't already enough, he keeps catching the ghostly figure that appears in the shadows of his home. The director, Ivan Kavanagh, relied on his own fears while writing this script and composing the film without any revisions. He even composed the sound effects from scratch to give the audience the best experience. One of the most infamous scenes from the film was where actor Rupert Evans, David, crawled through an unused public toilet during a heatwave in Dublin for 9 hours. The Canal's real horror is not the ghost. It actually asks you the question of whether there was any ghost in the first place. David may have been the killer all along, or he succumbed to his paranoia. He was already a broken man before the house got to him. So, there are several possibilities, but it's left up to your interpretation. Personally, I feel that's what makes the film worth it.
Don't look at her! Look away! Pan!
8. Wakewood, 2009. This film begins brutally. In the very first scenes, Patrick and Louise lose their 9-year-old daughter Alice to a savage dog attack. The couple decides to move to a village called Wakewood. There they find the locals were led by a patriarch named Arthur. He was capable of returning the dead for exactly 3 days, but the ritual was unsettling to the core. But there were certain conditions, like the deceased must be dead for less than a year. They cannot leave the village boundaries, and the deceased must be returned to the earth when the 3 days are up. But they broke every single rule, and the consequences that followed were gruesome. Alice starts killing other villagers and animals violently. When her parents attempted to bury her, she took pregnant Louise along with her to the grave, vanishing completely. But it doesn't end here. Things get more disturbing as Arthur performs the same ritual again to bring back Louise, and Patrick is seen prepping for a C-section to resurrect pregnant Louise, foreshadowing the never-ending cycle of horrendous consequences. Trust me, this is a movie that will haunt your dreams. This was a perfect movie, worthy of Hammer's first comeback in 30 years, and director David Keating's execution was on point. So yes, if you are into horror films and you haven't watched this yet, you're heavily missing out. 9. Rawhead Rex, 1986. So, technically this film isn't an Irish production, but it still deserves a spot on this list, filming the entire movie in County Wicklow, and using Ireland's rural landscape as the perfect backdrop to capture its ancient pagan nightmare. So, this is a film about an unstoppable pagan god who was ruthless in the most heinous way possible. The blunder starts when a farmer living in County Wicklow digs up an ancient pre-Christian deity from his field that was buried and sealed there for obvious reasons. You can imagine the past. That deity is who we call Rawhead Rex, and the moment he resurfaces, the chaos begins. He turns the village upside down by killing and eating children, urinating on priests just to show his dominance, and ripping anybody who gets in his way. Finally, an American conservationist named Howard Hallenbeck appears with a real solution by piecing together old church records on Rawhead and how to stop him. Rawhead was a monster with an uncontainable appetite, and he could only be stopped with a symbol of female power. For me, the most grotesque part of the film was where Rawhead baptized a priest by urinating on him. The film was actually meant to show the underlying psychological meaning behind Rawhead's rage, but they just portrayed him as a monster stomping through the countryside. So, the screenwriter, Clive Barker, was heavily displeased with the outcome, so much so that he decided the next film he wrote would be directed by him, and that was Hellraiser, and the rest is history. Rawhead Rex was shot in freezing Irish winter. At first, they had planned to shoot at Brave Film Studios in England, but then they moved to the Republic of Ireland to reduce the costs. Even the first choice for the film's demigod was not Heinrich von Schellendorf, it was actually Peter Mayhew, but the film's budget couldn't accommodate him. I feel this film is a good option to introduce yourself to Irish horror films. From a 2026 perspective, the costume might seem a bit more ridiculous than terrifying, but let's keep in mind this film was one of the most horrifying films of the 80s. Under that costume, there was a transgressive idea about pagan violence, masculine rage, and Christian ideology. Anyway, if you want to explore Irish horror films, this is a good old classic option. 10. Without Name, 2016. Eric is a land surveyor who was sent to assess a remote Irish forest known as Gan or Without Name for a shady development project. He brought his student and lover Olivia along with him to spend time together and distance himself from his marriage, which he had mentally left, but the forest had no interest in his personal arrangements. Sometimes the equipment fell, or the spatial logic stopped working. Eric then finds a journal left by a previous occupant who had spent years in the forest trying to decode the forest communication system, concluded the trees were speaking. From there, his sanity was consumed by strange occurrences in this. For the film's eerie soundtrack, instead of conventional instruments, broken pianos and old signal processors were used. Also, the film was actually shot in the Glendalough National Park in County Wicklow, and to make it more visually effective, director Lorcan Finnegan and cinematographer Piers McGrail deliberately used the forest to build that unsettling tension. This film is more of an art film than horror, and that might frustrate the viewers expecting horror. However, it's about the psychological horror that absorbs Eric, and it's disturbing, so don't judge the film before you watch it. 11. Caveat, 2020. In this film, Isaac is a drifter with partial memory loss, and he's talked into a job by one of his acquaintances, Mo, to look after his niece, who is a disturbed young woman called Olga. She lived in a crumbling house located on an isolated island, but one condition was that he had to wear a leather harness attached to a long track bolted through the walls of the house. It was done to restrict his movements in the house to make Olga feel safe. Olga suffered from catatonic lapses. Whenever she was awake, she roamed around with a sinister stuffed rabbit and a crossbow. As days passed, things started to deteriorate, and somehow in the house, the toy rabbit with a drum began playing on its own. When he followed the sound, he found the hidden, rotting corpse of Olga's mother. Then Olga told him that her uncle, Mo, along with her father, murdered her mother, and then with Isaac's help, Mo also lured her father to his death. Isaac revisited his fragmented memory and remembered that Mo had manipulated him, but Isaac had a change of mind and refused Mo, and it was actually Mo who got angry and pushed him off the balcony. That's where Isaac injured his head and developed insomnia. He realized as he was getting his memory back, Mo was planning to silence him completely. In the end, Isaac somehow manages to escape the house by leaving Mo behind to receive his punishment from Olga and her mother's spirit. Before he leaves, he looks back once more to see Olga locked in the harness and Mo shot in the leg by Olga's crossbow and getting pursued by the spirit. Damien McCarthy actually began the film with the question of why people don't leave haunted houses. The harness that Isaac voluntarily wore in the film was his answer. And remember the drumming rabbit I mentioned earlier? It was actually found on eBay by McCarthy, who liked collecting wind-up toys. For me, the film was a blend of unpredictable actions, harsh revelations, and fear that you won't be able to shake off. It definitely deserves a watch. 12. The Devil's Doorway, 2018. Director Clark wanted the texture of this film to resemble real documentary footage from the 1960s, which was the timeline she was working on. So, instead of digitally simulating the period, they shot the film on actual 16mm film stock. So the plot is set in October 1960, where the Vatican priests are sent to Magdalene Laundry and investigate the reports of the Virgin Mary statue weeping blood. Inside the chapel, they found out about the sadistic abuse, demonic possession, and Satanism that were taking place. They found a pregnant and possessed teenage girl locked in the basement, where the nuns were involved in these gruesome supernatural acts. The weight of the subject matter of this film was heavy, and Clark was definitely bold enough to write and direct it as a debut film, and also became the first woman in Northern Ireland to do so. And she made it clear that Magdalene Laundry was already a horror film, she just pointed her camera at it. For me, the supernatural elements were effective but secondary. The real horror was actually the institution itself and the sins you have to experience it to understand, so do watch. And with that, we come to the end of this video. Let us know in the comments below whether you have watched any of these films and your opinion on them. But before leaving, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.